Caleb entered through the door of his office building. "How's everything going, Andrew?" "Great." He took a seat behind the reception. Caleb owned a small construction company in Monroe, Louisiana. He and his friend Andrew ran the business together. Caleb sipped on his coffee and checked how far along his workers were on the current project. It was early in the morning, at only 9, when a woman came to the office. "Hi, I'm Deborah Cooper. I live here in Monroe, in Garden District. I would like to have my basement repaired. It's old and has been locked up for as long as I can remember." "That's no problem. My team and I can get the job done with ease." "Great. Thank you so much. I don't know much of how these things work, but it should be easy. All I want is for you to clean up down there, fix the plumbing, and leave the rest of the space open." "Mrs. Cooper, you don't need to worry. Everything will be how you want." Caleb searched for an opening in his schedule. Unfortunately, all his workers were occupied on another project. Caleb didn't have a vacancy until 2 weeks later. "All right, Mrs. Cooper, we can start on the project next month." "What? No. I need this done urgently." "Mrs. Cooper, I'm sorry, it's just not possible. I'm working on another project at the moment. You can't expect me to stop midway." Mrs. Cooper kept insisting, but Caleb too had no choice. But no matter how much Caleb tried to explain to her, Mrs. Cooper repeatedly demanded the same thing. Caleb was shocked at her stubbornness. He watched as the woman pulled out a wad of bills from her bag and placed it on the table. "Here, this is double the money for the project. I'm willing to pay triple if you will please get started by tomorrow." Caleb sighed. "All right, Mrs. Cooper. I'm not saying anything for sure. I'll call you later today and let you know." Later that day, Caleb called Mrs. Cooper and informed her he and his team would start working on the basement the following day. Caleb discussed the matter with Andrew. The woman was offering such a large amount for such a small task. The job was only worth a few days' work. Andrew advised him to postpone his other project and divide his workers into 2 for his convenience. The next morning, Caleb and his co-workers arrived at Mrs. Cooper's house. When they reached there, Mrs. Cooper told them to wait and went to her room. Within minutes, she returned fumbling with a bunch of keys in her hand. She led the team downstairs, where she started unlocking the basement door. Caleb was a bit alarmed to see how many locks and deadbolts had been installed on the door. It took a whole 10 minutes for Mrs. Cooper to sort out her keys and open each lock. The first day was for inspection, to see what needed to be repaired and what materials would be required. Mrs. Cooper opened the door. At once, a strong whiff of a damp odor filled the air. Mrs. Cooper herself held her nose. "No one has been here in so long. It's been almost 20 years. Wow, by the odor, I suspect there must be mold inside." Mrs. Cooper left the men to their work and went back upstairs. Caleb walked inside the dark basement. He searched for the lights. It wasn't long before he flipped a switch and the light bulb flickered on. The light wasn't that great. It was dim and kept flickering. But through the horrible lighting, Caleb could spot bats perched on the ceiling and the sounds of rats scurrying in their holes in the corners. Caleb and his men got straight to work. But it was only a matter of an hour when they realized there were major issues with the electricity in the basement. Caleb was not an electrician, but he had the basic knowledge. Even after checking everything, the issues still persisted. The lights would flicker on and off and sometimes would be off for long periods of time. The team managed to get the day's work done with their torchlights, since all they were really doing was clearing out the junk. The next day, Caleb arrived at the house at 8 a.m. with some of the supplies he needed. He planned to get all the work done by 8 p.m. The team made a lot of progress that day, but the electricity was still up and down. At around 6, Caleb's truck arrived with the materials they were waiting for. Caleb sent his co-workers to check on the delivery while he would finish up some work and meet them upstairs. Everyone headed upstairs, leaving Caleb all alone in the basement. Caleb cautiously turned the knob on one of the pipes, when suddenly he heard a loud blast. and the lights flickered off. Caleb shrugged and took out his flashlight and went to check the electrical panels. Caleb had been tinkering with it for about 10 minutes, but nothing seemed to be working. Just then, he heard a strange noise from the far corner of the room. Caleb assumed Andrew had come back for him. "Hey, we have to call in the electrician, Andrew. It's not possible to work like this." There was no reply, but Caleb still heard that noise. It was like the sound of clanging chains. "Andrew, is that you?" Caleb turned around. He pointed his flashlight around the room. There was no one there. Caleb scratched his head. Where did that noise come from? Just when Caleb turned around again, suddenly he heard a croaking noise. Startled, he turned around with his flashlight. "Who's there?" Caleb frantically looked here and there, and if he wasn't mistaken, he could swear he saw someone standing across the room. It wasn't one of his workers. The man wasn't wearing any uniform or helmet he recognized. Caleb couldn't see the face properly. The man suddenly ran out of sight. All Caleb could make out was that he was tall and skinny, rather haggard. His face was too darkened to focus. Suddenly, Caleb's flashlight started to flicker as well. The battery was running out. Caleb started to become anxious. It was in a matter of seconds before Caleb's flashlight turned off. Caleb was in complete darkness, and knowing he wasn't alone made him a bit uncomfortable. He took out his lighter from his pocket. With the light of the fire, he could barely see 2 feet around him. It was enough to walk to the exit. The basement was suddenly pin-drop silent. All Caleb could hear was his own breathing. His hands started to tremble as he took small steps towards the door. Caleb's eyes looked here and there, though he couldn't see much. He was anxious to check what was around him. Just when Caleb took a few more steps, he started to hear that clanging noise again, and stopped. Caleb's blood ran cold when he heard a whisper by his ear. "You can't trap me here forever." Suddenly, Caleb felt something cold around his neck. He was being strangled with metal chains. Caleb struggled holding the chain, trying to pull it the other way, but the force became even more stronger, and Caleb soon went unconscious. There was a power outage in the whole house when the others had gone to check the delivery. When everyone returned, they found Caleb unconscious in the basement. Mrs. Cooper immediately offered help and asked the workers to bring Caleb upstairs. Andrew allowed everyone leave and stayed with Caleb at Mrs. Cooper's house. He was shocked to see red marks around Caleb's neck. After about an hour, Caleb regained his consciousness. "Andrew, someone or something, it's in the basement." "There was a power outage, Caleb. Perhaps an intruder snuck into the house." Mrs. Cooper took a deep breath. "No, Andrew, it wasn't an intruder. Perhaps I should have told you earlier, but I was afraid that you wouldn't accept the job. I'm in desperate need to get this basement renovated, to rid it of its evil presence. The truth is, there isn't any person down there. There is something down there, something beyond this life of ours. And knowing what it is makes me fear it even more. I have been restless. I spent night after night not being able to sleep because of those noises. And the worst part is, I recognize those noises, where they're coming from. This is my family home. Now I live here with my children. My husband passed away a few years ago. If only he were here, perhaps I could have resolved this with him. But I have no choice to ask your help. Please, destroy everything downstairs and build it anew. I grew up here with my family. It was my father, my mother, me, and my elder brother. It all began when my brother returned from one of his hunting trips from Green Bay, Wisconsin. My brother had a hobby of hunting. He used to taxidermy his catches. There is a whole collection of taxidermy animals, from deer, wolves, bears, birds, and more in the storage. It was after that specific trip to Green Bay that he started to behave odd. He was overly enraged. He couldn't stand anyone in the house. He would always be yelling at everyone and hurling insults for no apparent reason. It was when he attacked my mother that we came to know he wasn't in his right mind. We tried not to upset him and kept him in seclusion while we brought over doctors. The doctors had to sedate him. They couldn't understand what was causing him to behave in such a way. They advised he be sent to a rehabilitation center where he could receive help for anger management. My mother refused the advice. He couldn't bear to see her son suffering in some locked-up room. She was determined to treat her son by herself. But over the days, my brother's condition only worsened, and we were coming into notice of the neighbors who were frightened by the yelling and the shouting that would be going on. My father cleaned out the basement for my brother. The yelling couldn't be heard, but I knew there was a lot more going on down there. My father had to shackle my brother so he wouldn't hurt himself. At night, I would hear him banging the metal chains on the wall. I was devastated, but I knew my parents were only trying to help him. Unfortunately, my brother passed away from this strange illness. Since then, the basement has been locked up. I still hear the noises now and then. I've always ignored them, but now that I'm living alone with my children, it's terrifying to know something is lurking right beneath us. So you think your late brother's restless soul still lurks in the basement? I'm really not sure. He was a good human being, a good brother, a good son. I have a hard time believing it's him. I believe it's whatever overpowered him. Mrs. Cooper, if this is the case, I don't think renovating the basement will resolve these issues. Take this. This is his card. He's a very learned man. He's the only person I can think of who might be able to give you a solution. Mrs. Cooper took the card and sighed. She looked upset. Caleb, I'm really sorry for what you experienced. It's all right, Mrs. Cooper. I understand what you must be going through. Caleb and his crew renovated Mrs. Cooper's basement with extra precaution. It took about 2 more days, but the job was well done. Fortunately for Mrs. Cooper, the issues resolved once the basement was renovated. She dearly wanted to thank Caleb for his work, but when she went to his office about 2 weeks later, she was surprised to see the company had shut down. Hello? Andrew? I was just thinking of calling you. Mrs. Cooper, we need your help. Caleb has been unwell ever since we left your house. There's something strange going on with him. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.